The autumn wind whistled through the crack in Officer James Miller's patrol car window as he sat brooding in the shadow of an old oak tree, his fingers drumming an agitated rhythm against the steering wheel. The morning briefing with Captain Rodriguez, still burning in his mind like acid. 20 minutes earlier, Rodriguez had slammed a thick folder onto her desk, her dark eyes boring into him with disappointment as she outlined the precinct's concerning pattern of racial profiling in traffic stops. Miller had felt his face grow hot with each statistic she presented, his defense mechanisms rising like walls around his consciousness. These numbers don't tell the whole story, he had argued, but the captain had simply pulled up his own stop record on her computer screen, the data painting a damning picture that he couldn't explain away. Now sitting in his usual spot along Maple Drive, Miller watched the stream of morning commuters with growing resentment. His mind twisted the captain's words into accusations against every officer who was just trying to do their job, keeping the streets safe the way they were trained, the way their instincts told them was right. His father's voice echoed in his head from years of dinner table conversations about the real world of policing, not the sanitized version they teach in sensitivity training. The radio crackled with routine traffic updates, but Miller barely registered them, his attention caught by the gleam of a midnight black Tesla Models approaching from the east. The car moved with quiet precision, exactly 3 miles under the speed limit, its windows tinted to the legal maximum. Something about its perfection, its careful adherence to every regulation, made his neck hairs stand on end. Miller straightened in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he observed the driver's silhouette through the windshield, taking note of every detail that could justify a stop. His training kicked in, cataloging information with mechanical efficiency, the time of day, the car's make and model, the demographic of the neighborhood, but underneath it all the captain's statistics buzzed like angry wasps in his consciousness. He watched the Tesla roll past his position, its electric motor whisking it along in near silence, the car's immaculate finish reflecting the morning sun like liquid obsidian. Miller noticed the custom wheels, the pristine paint job, the subtle luxury that spoke of serious money, his mind already constructing narratives about how someone in this neighborhood could afford such a vehicle. His fingers hovered over the patrol car's computer terminal, muscle memory urging him to run the plates, even as a small voice in the back of his mind whispered about the meeting with Rodriguez, about implicit bias, about department statistics, about change. But that voice was drowned out by years of ingrained habits, by the ghost of his father's teachings, by the weight of a badge that sometimes felt more like armor than responsibility. The Tesla continued its journey down Maple Drive, moving with almost deliberate care through the quiet suburb. Miller felt his pulse quicken with a familiar surge of adrenaline, his prejudices wrestling with his conscience in a battle that had been playing out across the city, across the nation for generations. The morning sun caught the car's brake lights as it slowed for a yellow light, and Miller made his decision. He flipped the key in the ignition, his patrol car humming to life beneath him. The weight of his utility belt shifted as he adjusted in his seat, his hand brushing against the familiar grip of his service weapon. Routine, he told himself, just another routine traffic stop. But even as he pulled out to follow the Tesla, the captain's words echoed in his thoughts like a prophecy he was choosing to ignore. The gap between his patrol car and the Tesla narrowed with each passing second. Miller's heart rate elevated slightly, his training kicking in automatically as he prepared for yet another stop that would soon become a statistic in the captain's folder. But this one, this perfect car with its perfect speed and its perfect tint, would prove him right, would justify his instincts, would show Rodriguez that the real world didn't fit into her neat statistical boxes. At least that's what he told himself as his hand reached for the lights. Marcus Washington glanced at his Tesla display's holographic readout, showing the time as his heart sank at the sight of red and blue lights flashing in his rearview mirror. The familiar weight of resignation settled over him even as his mind raced through the critical surgery timeline waiting at Central Hospital. The phone on his dashboard flashed urgently with messages from his surgical team, updating him on the patient's deteriorating condition. Emma Chen, age 42, mother of 3, presenting with a grade 4 brain aneurysm that could rupture at any moment, her chances of survival dropping with each passing minute. Yet here he was pulling over to the curb with practiced precision, his dashcam system automatically activating as it had 13 times before this year alone. His hands moved with careful deliberation, settling at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, muscle memory from the conversations his father had drilled into him since he was 16 years old. Keep your hands visible, speak calmly, clearly, and with respect, no matter what they say, no matter what they do. You come home alive, son. Those words had echoed through every traffic stop, through medical school, through his rise to chief of neurosurgery at one of the state's most prestigious hospitals. The Tesla chirped softly as its external cameras engaged, capturing every angle of the upcoming interaction. De Washington could feel his phone vibrating insistently in his pocket, knowing without looking that it was his team prepping the operating room, setting up the specialized equipment that only he was certified to use in the state. The weight of those responsibilities pressed against him like a physical force, even as he maintained his composed exterior. Rain began to speckle his windshield, the weather matching his darkening thoughts. As he watched the officer approach in his side mirror, De Washington noticed the aggressive stance, the hand hovering near the weapon. He breathed slowly, deliberately, using the same techniques he employed during complex surgeries to steady his nerves and focus his mind. There would be time later to process the emotion of it all. Right now, he needed to survive this encounter and get to his patient. The car's internal sensors displayed the officer's approach trajectory, his military-grade tint allowing him to observe without being observed, while his custom recording system documented every movement, every word. His lawyer had insisted on the upgrades after the ninth stop, when an officer had drawn his weapon over a supposed registration violation that turned out to be a computer error. De Washington had learned to transform fear into preparation. He could feel the seconds ticking away in his mind, like a surgeon's countdown. Each moment here was a moment lost in the operating room, where Emma Chen lay waiting, where her children sat in the waiting room clutching their father's hands, where his team stood ready with instruments that would remain sterile for only so long before they would need to be replaced. His brilliant mind automatically calculating survival rates against delay times. The screen on his dashboard continued to flash with updates from the hospital. Patient EB Paraisalingji ANUYSM Shoviangi Sides of INC Re-St Pressure Fenalui Inquiring ABOVTTELA. The messages scrolled past like a timeline of consequences, each one adding weight to the moment. Even as he kept his expression neutral, his breathing steady, his hands visible, remembering every lesson, every close call, every moment that had led him here. Through the rain-streaked window, he could make out the officer's face twisted with an expression he had seen too many times before, that mixture of suspicion and predetermined judgment that no amount of degrees, certificates, or achievements seemed able to erase. De Washington felt the familiar cold knot in his stomach. Even as his mind ran through the procedure he needed to perform, calculating angles, measuring millimeters, planning the delicate dance between life and death that awaited him at the hospital if he could just get through this moment. His Tesla hummed quietly beneath him, a cocoon of technology and safety measures born from experience and necessity. As he prepared himself for what was to come, the officer's boots crunched on wet gravel, growing closer with each step. While somewhere across town, Emma Chen's life hung in the balance, her story intertwining with his in ways neither of them could have predicted. When they woke up this morning, thunder rolled overhead as Officer Miller approached the Tesla, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the emergency lights in scattered red and blue fragments. His fingers flexed near his weapon, the morning argument with Captain Rodriguez still burning in his gut like bitter coffee, mixing now with the adrenaline of anticipation. De Washington watched the approaching figure in his monitors, noting every detail with the same precision he used in surgery. The officer's stance, the placement of his hand, the angle of approach, all factors in an equation he had solved too many times before. His phone's urgent buzzing had become a constant reminder of Emma Chen lying unconscious across town, her brain a ticking time bomb that only his hands could defuse. The rainfall intensified, drumming against the Tesla's roof in a chaotic rhythm as Officer Miller reached the driver's window, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness created by the tinted glass, the light aggressive searching holding none of the professional courtesy his training had emphasized. Dr. Washington remained still, his hands clearly visible, his mind running parallel tracks between survival protocols and surgical procedures. License and Registration Officer Miller barked, the words coming out harsher than he intended, his own voice sounding foreign in his ears, as if someone else was speaking through him, someone shaped by years of assumptions and inherited prejudices, the rain running down his neck, only adding to his irritation, even as a small voice in his mind whispered about statistics and consequences. "Certainly, Officer Dud Washington," responded, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used to steady nervous residents before complex procedures, his right hand moving with deliberate slowness toward the glove compartment, every motion smooth, telegraphed, designed to prevent misunderstanding, his dashcam recording every second, while his phone continued its urgent dance of vibration against his leg. Officer Miller watched the careful movements, his training screaming at him about potential threats, while Captain Rodriguez's words echoed in his consciousness, creating a dissonance that set his teeth on edge. The driver's measured calm somehow making him more anxious, more certain that something was off, even as he struggled to name exactly what. Dr. Washington retrieved his documents with practiced efficiency, presenting them in a clear plastic sleeve that kept his hands in view at all times, recognizing the growing tension in the officer's posture, reading the signs of escalation the way he read CT scans, looking for problems before they became critical, his mind still racing through surgical preparations, knowing every second here cost precious time in the operating room. The license and registration revealed nothing suspicious, which somehow made Officer Miller more frustrated, his flashlight beam scanning the car's interior, looking for something, anything to justify the unease he felt, the car's pristine condition and obvious expense only adding to his suspicion. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, falling back on familiar script, even as thunder cracked overhead. "I was driving exactly 3 miles under the speed limit," Officer Dove Washington replied, his tone remaining professional, despite the urgent messages still flowing across his dashboard about Emma Chen's deteriorating condition, his years of experience letting him maintain his composure even as he calculated the increasing risks of surgical delay. Officer Miller shifted his stance, rain dripping from his uniform as he processed the response, the driver's calm professionalism somehow feeling like a challenge even as he struggled to articulate any actual violation, the weight of his wet uniform adding to his discomfort, adding to the pressure he felt to find something to prove his instincts right. Dud Washington's phone buzzed again, this time with enough urgency that the screen lit up, visible to both men through the plastic sleeve holding his documents, the hospital ID clearly displayed beneath his driver's license, creating a moment of connection. Neither man had anticipated the sound of another thunderclap, punctuating the revelation that was about to unfold. Officer Miller squinted at the hospital ID card, illuminated by a flash of lightning, his grip on the flashlight loosening as recognition slammed into him like a physical blow. The name Dr. Marcus Washington, chief of neurosurgery at Central Hospital, seemed to float off the plastic surface, the same name his mother had spoken with such reverence just yesterday when describing the surgeon who might save her life. The rain continued its steady assault, but Miller barely noticed any more, his eyes fixed on the small photo showing the distinguished man in surgical scrubs, the same man he had followed. Profiled, stopped, harassed his mind, struggling to reconcile the badge number he had run, hoping to find something suspicious with the medical credentials that now seemed to mock his prejudices. Dr. Washington watched the change sweep across the officer's face, reading the micro expressions the way he read brain scans, noting the widening eyes, the slack jaw, the slight tremor in the hand that held his credentials. The hospital ID had often served as a shield in these situations, but something in the officer's reaction suggested more than the usual begrudging respect. "Your mother," Officer Miller started, his voice cracking slightly before he could continue. "Margaret Miller, scheduled for emergency surgery tomorrow morning." De Washington filled in the silence, his tactical mind connecting the dots even as his medical training catalogued the officer's physical responses, elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, stress response indicators, all pointing to an emotional shock. The flashlight beam wavered, then dropped, Miller unconsciously taking a step back as memories crashed through his professional demeanor. His mother in the hospital bed, her face twisted with pain, the doctors explaining the complexity of the procedure, the hope in her voice when she mentioned Dr. Washington's name, the same name he had approached with such unearned suspicion moments ago. More urgent messages flashed across Washington's dashboard display. Emma Chen's vital signs continuing their dangerous dance, his mind running parallel tracks between the immediate situation and the surgery that awaited, calculating risks and possibilities. The way he maneuvered through neural pathways, he recognized the officer's name, now remembered reviewing Margaret Miller's file between emergency consultations. She talks about you, Officer Miller managed, his voice stripped of its earlier authority, the weight of his actions settling over him like the steadily falling rain. You were supposed to do her surgery, give her a chance to see her grandkids, graduate, the realization of how close he had come to interfering with his own mother's care hitting him with devastating clarity. Washington maintained his professional composure even as he absorbed the irony of the situation, his hands still positioned carefully on the steering wheel, where they could be seen, his mind already formulating how to handle this moment in a way that might create lasting change rather than mere temporary shame. Beyond those hands lay the skills that could save not only Margaret Miller but Emma Chen, whose time was running dangerously short. The tablet mounted on Washington's dashboard lit up with another urgent message from the hospital, the bright screen illuminating both men's faces in its harsh glow. Patient Stijn showing G sidiness of INCROTAST INTROAC per ANIL Petrius SUOE immediate surgical intervention recommended. The message scrolled past its clinical language, carrying the weight of a life hanging in balance. Officer Miller stepped back further from the Tesla, his hand now completely away from his weapon, his entire body language transformed by the revelation that the man he had stopped, this man he had approached with such suspicion, held not only his mother's life in his skilled hands, but the lives of countless others waiting at the hospital, their stories, their families, their futures, all interconnected in ways he had never considered before this moment. Lightning flashed again, highlighting the surreal tableau of doctor and officer caught in this moment of recognition, the rain continuing its steady rhythm like a countdown to decisions that would reshape both their perspectives. Washington saw the change in the officer's stance, reading in it the possibility of transformation, even as his brilliant surgical mind kept track of the precious minutes slipping away. Officer Miller stood frozen in the rain, his world tilting on its axis as years of ingrained prejudices collided with the reality before him. Memories of his mother in the hospital bed flashed through his mind, her voice weak but hopeful as she spoke about Washington, the surgeon who had given her hope when other doctors had shaken their heads, and talked about quality of life. Inside the Tesla, Washington maintained his careful composure, watching the internal struggle play out across the officer's face like a surgical monitor displaying irregular rhythms, his own thoughts divided between the unfolding situation and Emma Chen, whose life hung in the balance with each passing minute. The dashboard continued its urgent display of messages, each one a reminder of the cost of delay. The rain drummed harder against their shoulders, but neither man moved, caught in a moment of transformation that felt both endless and too brief. Officer Miller remembered his father's voice at the dinner table years ago, teaching him about suspicion, about profiling, about trusting his gut. But now his gut churned with shame as he realized how those lessons had poisoned his judgment, led him to become exactly what Captain Rodriguez had accused him of being. Washington saw the change happening, recognized the familiar signs of someone confronting their own biases, his trained medical mind analyzing the micro expressions, the shift in body language, the way Officer Miller seemed to physically shrink as realization washed over him like the rain that soaked them both. Meanwhile, his phone vibrated again with updates about Emma Chen, her survival chances decreasing with each passing moment. "Your mother," Officer Miller started again, his voice cracking. She showed me your picture yesterday, told me you were the best, that you gave her hope when no one else would. The admission felt like gravel in his throat, raw and painful, the same throat that had been tight with suspicion minutes ago when he had followed the Tesla, deciding it looked too expensive, too perfect for this neighborhood. I need to get to the hospital, Washington spoke quietly, but firmly, his voice carrying the same authority that had reassured Margaret Miller during their consultation. Emma Chen cannot afford any more delays. He kept his hands visible, but his eyes met Officer Miller's directly, for the first time challenging him to make the right choice, to be the person his mother believed in when she spoke about her police officer's son. Officer Miller felt the weight of his badge pressing against his chest like a stone, the same badge that had given him the power to stop this man, this surgeon, this professional who held his mother's life in his skilled hands. Captain Rodriguez's statistics floated through his mind, no longer abstract numbers, but real people with real lives, real families, real emergencies that his actions could destroy. The Tesla hummed quietly beneath them, its sophisticated cameras recording every second of this transformation, while inside Washington calculated survival rates versus time delays the same way. He mapped surgical approaches, the numbers growing more concerning with each passing moment, yet he recognized the importance of this moment, the potential for change that lay beneath the surface of their confrontation. Shame burned through Officer Miller hotter than anger had ever been as he realized how close he had come to interfering with not one but two critical surgeries, his mother's scheduled procedure tomorrow morning, and whoever waited for Washington. Now his training screamed at him to maintain authority, to find some violation to justify his stop. But his humanity finally spoke louder. Lightning illuminated them both again, officer and surgeon, caught in a tableau of recognition and transformation. Washington's dashboard continued its urgent updates, each one a reminder of Emma Chen waiting across town, her family pacing the surgical floor, while Officer Miller struggled with the collapse of assumptions that had guided his entire career, the rain washing away old prejudices even as it soaked through his uniform to the skin beneath. Washington recognized the pivotal moment unfolding before him. Years of teaching residents how to handle delicate brain tissue had taught him to recognize when pressure needed to be applied and when healing required a gentler touch. Reaching slowly for his tablet, he pulled up Margaret Miller's brain scans, letting the officer's flashlight illuminate the complex network of blood vessels that threatened his mother's life. See this area here, he spoke with the same patience he used in the operating room, teaching residents how to navigate the delicate pathways of the human brain. Your mother's aneurysm sits at a critical junction, Officer Miller, just like Emma Chen, who is waiting for me now. Every minute we delay increases the chance of rupture, the medical terminology flowing naturally as he watched understanding dawn in the officer's eyes. Officer Miller leaned closer despite himself drawn in by the calm authority in Washington's voice, the same voice that had given his mother hope, now drawing him into a world where skill and expertise transcended the superficial judgments he had been trained to make. The rain seemed to fade into background noise as he absorbed the complexity of the surgical challenges that awaited this man he had profiled without thought. The tablet displayed another scan, this one of Emma Chen, her aneurysm a dark shadow threatening to tear apart the delicate tissue. Washington explained the similarities between the two cases, how timing and precision could mean the difference between life and death, between families celebrating recovery or mourning loss, his words painting a picture of medicine that made racial prejudice seem not just wrong but absurdly irrelevant. Your mother, Officer Miller, she said you were the only one willing to try. The words came out soft, almost lost in the sound of rain, but Washington heard them, noting the shift in the officer's tone from confrontational to questioning, his trained ear catching the subtle harmonics of transformation, the way he listened for subtle changes in heart monitors during surgery. Yes, Washington responded, because sometimes the most difficult cases require us to look past what others assume is impossible, to see the potential for healing where others see only risk. His words carried layers of meaning beyond the medical, speaking to assumptions, prejudices, and the possibility of change that hung between them like the charged air before lightning strikes. Officer Miller's radio crackled with routine traffic updates, but he stood transfixed as Dove Washington continued explaining the intricate dance of surgical intervention, how success often meant challenging established assumptions, working against statistical odds, seeing beyond surface appearances to deeper truths. The parallels to their current situation grew more apparent with each carefully chosen word. The Tesla's dashboard continued its urgent updates about Emma Chen, but Dut Washington maintained his measured teaching pace, recognizing that this moment of education might save more lives in the long run than even his surgical skills could accomplish. His voice steady as he drew connections between the prejudices that dismissed difficult cases and those that caused unnecessary traffic stops. In the glow of the tablet screen, Officer Miller saw his mother's scan again the complex network of vessels that Dut Washington would navigate tomorrow morning with the same steady hands that now held the device. His father's lessons about suspicion and authority seemed to fade against the evidence of expertise, dedication, and humanity displayed before him. A particularly urgent message flashed across the dashboard: Emma Chen's vital signs demanding immediate attention. De Washington allowed this reality to enter their shared space, letting Officer Miller see the real-time consequences of unconscious bias, the way delayed treatment could transform a difficult situation into an impossible one, his teaching extending beyond medical knowledge to touch something more fundamental. Thunder rolled overhead as understanding continued to dawn across Officer Miller's face, his transformation visible in the way his shoulders dropped, the way his hand fell completely away from his weapon, the way he began to see Dut Washington not as a profile but as a person whose skills and dedication might save not only his mother but countless others whose lives hung in the balance of split-second decisions and careful judgments. Officer Miller stepped back from the Tesla, his decision crystallizing in the rain-soaked moment as another urgent alert flashed across Dut Washington's dashboard. "Let me escort you to the hospital," he said, his voice carrying a new tone of respect and urgency, the words feeling like the first step on a longer journey of transformation. Dut Washington assessed the offer with the same quick precision he used in surgery, weighing risks and benefits, calculating the advantage of a police escort against the precious minutes already lost, his mind running through traffic patterns and fastest routes, while Emma Chen's vital signs continued their dangerous dance across his screen. "That would be appreciated," he responded, starting his engine. The Tesla hummed to life as Officer Miller sprinted back to his patrol car radio, already in hand. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247, requesting priority clearance for emergency medical transport to Central Hospital," his voice steady now, with purpose, the same authority he had misused earlier now deployed in service of saving lives. Watching in his rearview mirror as Dut Washington pulled the Tesla into position behind him, lights and sirens cut through the rain-dark morning, their combined blue and red glow reflecting off wet pavement as both vehicles accelerated through the streets. Dut Washington maintaining perfect position behind the patrol car, his hands steady on the wheel the way they would soon be steady on surgical instruments, his mind already shifting into the preliminary phases of operative planning. They moved through traffic like a choreographed dance, Officer Miller's expertise in city streets matching Dut Washington's precision as they navigated increasingly busy intersections, dispatch coordinating with other units to clear their path, other officers hearing the calls, catching the urgency in Miller's voice as he guided them through the quickest route to the hospital, every second now bent towards saving life rather than suspecting it. In the patrol car, Miller felt the weight of his transformation with each turn, each flash of his lights, each radio call to clear an intersection, his actions now aligned with true service and protection, the kind he'd sworn to provide when he first pinned on his badge, the kind that had gotten lost somewhere between his father's lessons and his own hardened assumptions. Dut Washington watched his GPS update their arrival time, the numbers improving with each cleared intersection, his tactical mind appreciating the efficiency of their progress even as he prepared for the surgery ahead, sending rapid voice commands through his car's system to update his surgical team on his approach, the Tesla's sophisticated technology turning their high-speed journey into a mobile surgical prep room. Other drivers pulled aside as they passed Miller, watching them move with the same instinct that had made him pull over the Tesla earlier. But now he saw those reactions differently, understanding how snap judgments and surface appearances could hide deeper truths, more important realities that deserved careful consideration rather than quick condemnation. Through the rain and traffic, they wove their way closer to the hospital. Miller coordinating with units ahead to clear major intersections, while Dove Washington received updates from his team. Emma Chen's stabilized but critical surgical suite, prepared instruments, laid out, residents briefed, and waiting, the multiple streams of information flowing together like the operating room hummed with focused energy as Dr. Washington worked with practiced precision, his hands steady as they navigated the delicate pathways of Emma Chen's brain, while in the waiting room, Officer Miller sat still in his wet uniform, watching the OR status board track the progress of the surgery that would save a life he had almost delayed. Other officers began arriving for their shift change, drawn by the story that had already started spreading through the department. Miller watched their reactions as they learned whose mother would be under the same skilled hands. Tomorrow saw the moment of recognition cross their faces as they connected their own traffic stop stories with the surgeon who now worked to save lives just beyond the waiting room doors. Through the observation window, Miller could see the intricate dance of the surgical team, Washington's calm presence at the center directing every movement, the same steady authority he had shown in the rain, now focused on the microscopic landscape of neural tissue. The officer's mind flashed back to the tablet images of his mother's scan, knowing her life would soon depend on those same skilled hands. Emma Chen's family huddled together across the waiting room, their anxious whispers a reminder of what was at stake. Miller found himself unable to look directly at them, shame mixing with hope as he realized how close his actions had come to devastating their lives. His radio sat silent on his belt, now a reminder of the power it represented and how that power could be wielded for help or harm. The OR nurse emerged, periodically updating the status board with clinical precision terms Miller didn't fully understand, but he watched Dr. Washington's residents, their faces showing deep respect as they discussed the innovative technique their mentor was employing, the same man Miller had approached with unwarranted suspicion, now teaching the next generation of surgeons between careful moves that danced between life and death. Captain Rodriguez appeared during the third hour of surgery, her presence unexpected but somehow fitting as she sat beside Miller without speaking for several long moments, the weight of their morning confrontation transformed by the events that followed. Finally, she spoke softly about systemic change, about teaching moments, about how sometimes the universe handed you a lesson you couldn't ignore. Through the window they could see Dr. Washington adjust the microscope, his movements precise, each motion calculated, efficient, the same efficiency he had shown following Miller's patrol car through rain-slicked streets, now turned to the delicate work of preserving the essence of who Emma Chen was, her memories, her personality, her future, all balanced on the edge of instruments wielded by hands Miller had almost forced away from their purpose. Other patients' families in the waiting room began sharing their stories in hushed voices, tales of Dr. Washington's skill, his dedication, his willingness to take cases other surgeons deemed too risky. Miller listened, absorbing each account like evidence in an investigation, but this time the evidence painted a picture of excellence, of service, of a man whose contribution to society went far beyond any superficial judgments. The surgery stretched into its fifth hour, Miller remaining in his damp uniform, even as other officers came and went, his presence a form of penance and education, both watching, learning, understanding. Captain Rodriguez stayed too, their shared silence, more productive than their heated morning argument, had been as they witnessed the impact of bias and the power of its transformation. When Dr. Washington finally emerged from the OR, his surgical cap still on his focus, still absolute, he noticed Miller waiting, his expression shifting slightly with recognition. "You should go home, officer, get some rest," he said. "Your mother's surgery is first thing tomorrow morning," the words carrying no trace of judgment or resentment, just the same professional care he offered every patient, every family. Miller stood, his uniform finally dry, but forever changed by the morning's rain. Watching as Dr. Washington delivered the news to Emma Chen's family, their tears of relief, their embraces, their joy at a future restored his own eyes, burning as he realized how close he had come to preventing this moment, his badge catching the fluorescent light, as he shifted, a reminder of the responsibility it carried, and how today had taught him to carry it better. 3 months after the rainy morning that changed everything, Officer Miller stood before a fresh class of police academy recruits, his mother's successful surgery scar hidden beneath her hair. As she sat in the front row beside Dr. Washington, their shared presence adding weight to the story he now told at every training session about assumptions, bias, and the power of transformation. The lecture hall remained silent as Miller described that morning, sharing every detail of his prejudiced thoughts, his confrontation with Captain Rodriguez, his pursuit of the Tesla, his shame when recognition hit, and most importantly, the lesson that had reshaped his entire approach to policing. Dr. Washington, occasionally adding medical perspectives about split-second decisions and their lasting consequences. Outside, through the academy windows, they could see the department's first community health and law enforcement partnership fair taking shape, tents rising in the morning sun as medical professionals from Central Hospital set up beside police officers, their combined presence a testament to the program De Washington and Miller had created together, turning their rain-soaked encounter into a catalyst for systemic change. Emma Chen stood at one of the health screening stations, her complete recovery a testament to Dr. Washington's skill, her presence today a reminder of how close prejudice had come to derailing multiple lives. She shared her story too, now part of the department's training program, her perspective helping new officers understand the ripple effects of their actions, the lives that hung in the balance of their split-second judgments. Captain Rodriguez moved through the crowd of officers and medical personnel, her clipboard tracking the day's activities, but her attention focused on the larger transformation she had witnessed in her department. The morning statistics she had confronted Miller with, now replaced by new numbers showing dramatic decreases in biased stops, increases in community trust, and most importantly, lives saved through faster medical response times. Dr. Washington had adapted his teaching methods from the operating room to the academy, sharing insights about human anatomy and split-second decisions in ways that helped officers understand their own reactions better. His surgical precision finding new application in dissecting bias, teaching rookies and veterans alike to recognize and excise prejudice from their judgment calls with the same care he used in brain surgery. The partnership program had spread beyond their city, gaining attention from departments and hospitals nationwide. Miller found himself giving interviews, sharing the story that had started with shame but ended in transformation, his father's old lessons about suspicion replaced by new understanding, about service, about protection, of seeing people as people first, their uniforms, titles, and appearances second. Margaret Miller worked the registration table, her recovered memory and cognitive functions a living testament to Dr. Washington's skill. Her pride now doubled as she watched her son teach lessons about change, watched the doctor who saved her life help save other lives in unexpected ways, her presence bridging the gap between medical and law enforcement communities in ways neither had anticipated. Inside the academy, Miller concluded his presentation with body camera footage from a recent traffic stop, showing how the lessons had changed his approach, the video capturing his respectful interaction, his awareness of medical emergencies, his focus on service rather than suspicion, the recruits watching intently as he demonstrated what they had spent the morning discussing. Dr. Washington stood to address the recruits, his surgical schedule cleared for these monthly sessions, his commitment to changing minds, matching his dedication to healing bodies. He spoke about pressure points in society where prejudice could restrict blood flow to communities, where bias could create clots in the systems meant to protect and serve as medical metaphors, making complex social issues accessible, personal, relevant. As the session ended and the recruits filed out toward the community fair, Miller and Dr. Washington shared a look of understanding, their unlikely partnership having grown from that rainy morning into something neither had imagined possible. The sound of sirens in the distance no longer carrying tension But hope as another cruiser escorted another ambulance through traffic, the city's emergency responders now working together with new awareness, new purpose, new possibility.